Stop, you're smoking weed wrong. If you're a stoner, you're smoking weed wrong. If you're self-medicating, you're smoking weed wrong. If you're smoking to disengage from the world, you're smoking weed wrong. If you're smoking because you're bored, you're smoking weed wrong. I attribute the shift in thought processing associated with the marijuana high to a flip in neurological cognitive dominance from the left to right hemisphere of the brain, the marijuana mind flip. The marijuana mind flip is the primary benefit of marijuana, as explained in my book. Carl Sagan made the same attribution over 50 years ago in his Pulitzer Prize winning book, The Dragons of Eden. He also framed it poetically within the following metaphor. Our awareness of right hemisphere function is a little like our ability to see stars in the daytime. The sun is so bright that the stars are invisible. In the same way, the brilliance of our most recent evolutionary accretion, the verbal abilities of the left hemisphere, obscures our awareness of the function of the intuitive right hemisphere, which in our ancestors must have been the principal means of perceiving the world. Marijuana is often described as improving our appreciation of and abilities in music, dance, art, pattern and sign recognition, and our sensitivity to nonverbal communication. To the best of my knowledge, it is never reported as improving our ability to read and comprehend Ludwig Wittgenstein or Immanuel Kant, to calculate the stresses of bridges, or to compute Laplace transformations. I wonder if, rather than enhancing anything, the cannabinoids, the active ingredient in marijuana, simply suppress the left hemisphere and permit the stars to come out. Sagan published an anonymous essay under the name of Mr. X in his colleague Dr. Lester Grinspoon's influential and seminal book, Marijuana Reconsidered, published in 1971. In his essay, Sagan explains how marijuana helped him get in touch with his artistic and musical sides, as well as how he experienced both interpersonal and intrapersonal insights while high, and how he experienced more intimate connections with both nature and his body while experiencing the effects of marijuana. Even though he admitted to having the occasional deep insight or out-of-the-box idea in his dominant media, linguistic and mathematical, the primary benefits that he noted for himself were found in how marijuana helped broaden him in the areas that were not his dominant media of attention, ways of attending that he'd been repressing, suppressing, and displacing most of his life to focus on science, math, and academic writing. When I smoke weed, I feel an immediate shift from a focused, calculating, and analytical mindset to a more open, intuitive, and holistic point of view. Rather than seeing my world as a problem in search of a solution, I see it as an environment in search of an inhabitant. A distant, discrepancy-minded, problem-solving way of attending shifts to an integrated and integrating way of attending. If we think of our general way of attending during business hours as left hemispheric in its tendency to narrowly focus on problem-solving tasks, the flip side to that mode of attending would be the more holistic and integrating right hemispheric approach. This, in essence, is the marijuana mind flip. On a purely cognitive level, the marijuana flip helps my mind escape the cage of hyperfocus that I deliberately lock myself in for the purpose of work. It frees my thoughts by widening and loosening the associations that I permit my mind to follow and entertain. As a result, my really good original ideas, or associations, usually emerge shortly after 4:20 p.m., after I've turned off my computer, as I'm playing the piano or guitar, gardening, biking, or walking the dog. Similar experiences are universal, though not necessarily attributed to the marijuana mind flip, but to the switch from conscious focus to unfocused intuition. Intuition is knowing without thinking, such as having a sudden insight that gives us a new perspective. Wittgenstein noted that our best thoughts always come to us within the context of the three B's: the bed, the bath, and the bus. The mind, when deeply focused, falls prey to inattentional blindness, the inability to see anything outside of our myopic frame of focus. We're unaware of anything we're not attending to. Flipping our attention to a mindset that's by nature less focused and more open is the key to experiencing the cognitive breakthroughs that only come when we're thinking, to recall a tired old cliche, outside the box. To think outside the box, one must first exit the box. The marijuana mind flip, I've found, facilitates this necessary box exodus. If you're a stoner, you're smoking weed wrong. A stoner is someone who's stoned most of the time. They don't necessarily smoke a lot, but they start smoking early in the day, way before 4:20 p.m. Why is 4:20 a thing anyway? For most people who work roughly 9 to 5-ish type jobs, 4:20 p.m. is a pretty good time to make the flip. It is for me, at least. I generally get up before 8 a.m. and get busy writing and answering emails and generally doing left hemispheric type work by 8:20 a.m. Then by 4:20 p.m., I've reached saturation in that mode of thinking. There's literally no point in continuing with that way of working and thinking because I'd just be fighting my own saturation fatigue, fighting my own inhibition energy, fighting an uphill battle against myself. I make sure that I've gotten done everything that absolutely needs to get done that day work-wise by 4:20 p.m. so I could go ahead and flip and then transition to other tasks that are more amenable to a right hemispheric approach. I play piano or guitar, do some gardening, walk the dog, do the dishes, ride my bike, maybe paint a watercolor or go kayaking. You get the idea. The 420 rule is without a doubt the most important rule when it comes to smoking weed. Obviously, if you have a different schedule, you should adjust the timing of your own personal 420 in relation to your own personal schedule. Following the rule means you're using the drug for its most useful effect, the flip from left to right, and all that this flip entails. You're maximizing the work time for your left hemisphere in the first 8 to 9 hours of the day, and then you're taking advantage of the physical and psychological benefits of right hemispheric thinking in the latter part of the day. The 420 rule promotes efficiency in both your productive work time and in your recreational leisure time, the time when we recreate and reground ourselves through the integrated and holistic approach of the right hemisphere. Most importantly, following the 420 rule means you're not a stoner. You're not always stoned, retreating from the world and the stressors within. To the contrary, you're fully engaged in the world every day, up to the point where you decide that it's time to step back and deliberately disengage for a while until the next day. The purpose of the flip is not just to disengage from left hemispheric thinking. It is to re-engage in right hemispheric thinking. The 420 rule could be summed up in the notion that there's a time for smoking weed and a time to refrain from smoking weed, regardless of when your personal 420 is set. One good reason to refrain until 420-ish is because of the unavoidable law of physics. Whatever comes up must always come down. If you get high in the morning, you'll be feeling low on energy by the afternoon. You'll be coming down from your high. You can take a long nap, but if you do that every day, your productivity will suffer. You can speed yourself up with coffee or cigarettes or other stimulants, but that's a very dangerous cycle of drug dependence to initiate. You can just keep smoking so that you don't actually come down, but then you'll just be stoned all day. And so much for productivity and the marijuana mind flip and all of its benefits. No, The easiest, simplest, healthiest, and most balanced way is to simply wait until 4:20 p.m. The wisdom of the ancients has always advised us that all things could be consumed, but only in moderation. Moderation of consumption is implicit within the 420 rule. If the purpose of smoking weed is to affect the mind flip from left to right, then what weed provides is contrast facilitation. The quick action of the drug affects a noticeable and stark contrast in our way of thinking before and after 4:20 p.m., especially as it pertains to left versus right hemispheric thinking. The marijuana mind flip is useful only in as much as it facilitates this contrast. If you're self-medicating, you're smoking weed wrong. Marijuana is not an antidote for anxious depression. It may take those symptoms away temporarily while using it, but the fact that your anxious depression returns when the drug wears off means that the drug didn't cure anything. It just temporarily dispelled the symptoms. Anxious depression is a product of your media environment. The primary media environment, verbal conscious thought, produces the hyperconscious rumination that envelops your mind in anxious depressive thoughts. Simply flipping the medium of consciousness from left to right does not extract your thought process from the primary environment. You're still in the same environment, engaged in the same medium. You're just experiencing it in a different way. Because smoking weed does not switch your medium of engagement, it only flips the mode of that medium of engagement from left to right. You're still likely to feel anxious and depressed even after smoking weed. It's happened to me many times. I was anxious and depressed, so I smoked weed, sat there, feeling high, but still thinking the same anxious, depressive thoughts. It's easy to wallow in your own anxious depression when stoned because it doesn't feel as bad as when you're not stoned, but you're still smoking weed wrong. The point of the flip is to use it as a launch pad to dive into another medium of engagement, one that will moderate, redirect, suppress, or stifle the hyperconscious ruminations that cause anxious depression. If you're smoking weed and then sitting idly in a chair or staring at a screen, feasting on the same poisoned thoughts that now taste slightly sweeter, you're not taking advantage of the primary benefits offered by marijuana, and you are most definitely smoking weed wrong. You're also smoking weed wrong if you're getting too high, some or all of the time, or less likely if you're not getting high enough. The two active chemicals at work in marijuana, THC and CBD, have different effects. THC gets you high, and you feel it more in your head, as it actively affects your cognitive and perceptive faculties, while CBD creates a mellow feeling in your body, but you don't feel it at all in your head. People who use marijuana for medical reasons tend to prefer higher CBD to THC ratios. That's because they're using it to manage pain, tension, or stress in their daily lives. They don't want to be high, but the mellow feeling in their body helps them get through their day, with none of the cognitive effects of THC and none of the side effects of commercial pharmaceuticals. Recreational marijuana users like it the other way around. As a consumer or someone considering becoming a consumer of marijuana, you should be knowledgeable about the product and understand that there's not just one way to smoke weed. Smoking weed, if you opt for a high CBD, low THC variety, doesn't even get you high. If you think weed only gets you high and that there's just one way to do it, you're definitely smoking weed wrong. If you're smoking to disengage from the world, you're smoking weed wrong. We all need to disengage at one point of the day, to step back, depressurize, stop doing for a moment, and just be. I respect that moment by ingesting an herb that certain cultures have worshipped as a sacrament for thousands of years. Disengagement must and should occur, but that's just step one. Step two, vastly more important, is re-engagement. Re-engagement in the world is accomplished either by switching from one medium, likely to be linguistic or mathematical, to another, or by flipping one's mode of engagement, such as a receptive mode, to another mode, such as expressive. Flipping from writing emails to reading a novel, for instance, is a mode flip from expressive to receptive. Disengagement from email writing is a step in a process, not a process in and of itself. If you don't complete the process via re-engagement, i.e. picking up the novel, then you're missing the entire point, and you're definitely smoking weed wrong. You may be under the wrong impression that the function of weed is to mellow you out so you can disengage, veg out, and do nothing. When the real function of weed is to energize you so you can re-engage in something fun and creative, or at least something that's satisfying or recreative. Part of the problem may be when you smoke. Admittedly, 4:20 p.m. is a downtime, a time of low energy, a time when both saturation nausea and saturation fatigue are at their peaks. We need a break, and we naturally think that a break entails prolonged disengagement. A break entails momentary disengagement, followed soon after by active re-engagement. Because we're tired and burned out, we use 4:20 p.m. as an excuse to veg out and do nothing the rest of the day and the night, in which case you're definitely smoking weed wrong. 4:20 is the time to redirect your energies, not to quash them. Be mindful of your saturation nausea and saturation fatigue at 4:20 p.m. and balance your engagement by switching your media environment. Don't just smoke weed. Turn off your computer, grab a snack or maybe a cup of tea or small coffee to help re-energize yourself for the next part of your daily adventure. Go outside if possible. Take a deep breath of fresh air, set up your next medium of engagement, and then smoke weed as a deliberate means of launching off into your next escapade. You'll be surprised at how much energy you have after 4:20 p.m. once you change your media environment, and you'll be surprised at how much your mood changes as a result of changing your behaviors within that environment, and not just as a result of smoking weed. Change your media environment, your thoughts will follow. Smoking weed can be the catalyst for change, but it does not constitute change in and of itself. If you think it does, then you're definitely smoking weed wrong. Temporal distortion, the feeling that time is being stretched out or distended, is a common side effect of marijuana, and I believe it's a crucial aspect of its appeal. In our linear, rather than cyclical perspective of time, any sense of time not governed by the construct of time as duration is perceived as distorted. This is a bias that does us undeniable harm. Weed can help. High time is different from time as duration. 4:20 has become a symbol for marijuana use, which is unfortunate because embedded within the symbol itself is a direct reference to time as duration, one of the anxiety-inducing constructs that marijuana is supposed to help us overcome. By fostering a focus on the present moment rather than the future, smoking weed reduces my chronic impatience, which is just another form of time anxiety. If used properly, marijuana can help break the chains that lock our minds in the temporal prison cell of time as duration. When my mind is locked into the left hemispheric work mode of maximum efficiency, I experience time as duration as the sense of time compaction, a constant feeling of dread that time is running out. When I flip to the right hemispheric recreational mode, facilitated by marijuana, my sense of time expands and extends, giving me the feeling that time is stretching out. My opinion is that temporal distortion is not purely the effect of marijuana, but rather it's the effect of the stark contrast in our perception of time, from the left hemispheric mode, in which our sense of time as duration is artificially condensed, to the right hemispheric mode, in which our sense of time is untethered from the construct of duration, and therefore felt more fully and more freely than before. Hence, the temporal distortion attributed to the marijuana high is merely the feeling of temporal freedom, attained once our sense of time is liberated from the harmful construct of time as duration. If you're smoking weed because you're bored, you're smoking weed wrong. Any drug is likely to evoke both a positive and a negative effect. That is, something added to experience and something detracted. A drug such as cocaine, for instance, induces a sudden and powerful high, followed shortly after by a depressing low, as the positive effect of the drug subsides to the negative effect and then completely fades away. Marijuana's anxiolytic and antidepressant effects are well known. Reducing or masking the symptoms of anxious depression is the drug's negative effect, the thing it takes away from your mind and behavior. The negative effect is real, but temporary. Your anxious depression will return once your mind recovers from the curveball it was pitched by the ingestion of a psychoactive substance. That's because your anxious depression comes from your media environment, not your mind, and certainly not from substances introduced to your mind. If you smoke weed and stay stuck in your toxic media environment, you'll just be high and, concurrently, a bit anxious and depressed as well. The high takes the edge off of the anxious depression for sure, but is that all you want? An edgeless anxious depression? All recreational drug use is dangerous because it offers the illusion of anxiety and depression relief, but it's really just taking the edge off. And so we drug ourselves to adapt to our immediate environments, to our cages, rather than to free ourselves of them. We self-diagnose our anxious depression as boredom, and then we self-medicate with marijuana, fooling ourselves into thinking that the marijuana relieves our boredom, when in fact it just takes the edge off. The only way to cure boredom or anxious depression is to change your media environment. And then engage your body and mind in activities that disengage your mind from the hyperconscious rumination that generates anxious depressive thought. In other words, change your media environment and your thoughts will follow. That's where the positive effect of marijuana comes in. The marijuana mind flip opens wide the doors of perception and of cognition as well. It can and has been used as a launchpad into more intuitive, imaginative, and creative media of engagement. Take advantage of the creative juices that marijuana can help make flow, and plan out the ways you will channel the positive effect of the marijuana mind flip before you smoke weed. By taking advantage of both the negative and positive effects of marijuana, you realize the maximized benefits of the drug as it affects you, and more importantly, you realize the full potential of yourself as it is affected by the drug and beyond. One reason why marijuana is often misused as a cure for boredom is because it helps turn a mindless task into a mindful one. Walking the dog, doing the dishes, mowing the lawn, these are tasks we avoid because they seem stupid, boring, and mindless. Therefore, we pay someone else to do them, or we pawn the chores off on others because each moment of our time as duration is too precious to waste on such mindless and meaningful chores. Smoking weed helps release us from the prison cell of anxious depressive thought, in which each minute is calculated in terms of profit or loss, and there's not a second to spare for anything that doesn't earn a dollar. Walking the dog becomes a walking meditation on life. Washing the dishes, a standing meditation on the self. And mowing the lawn becomes a moving meditation on nature. The positive effects of marijuana naturally lead our mind in the right direction, which is away from itself, away from the bottomless dark pond of narcissistic self-reflection that it loves to wallow in. It's also quite likely that you may be getting too high. When a substance is illegal, users tend to use the substance in ways that are less than optimal. They're limited to whatever they can get, which is likely to be too potent, and because supply may be irregular, there's a tendency to binge when you have some and abstain when you don't have any. Sometimes being high in and of itself leads to getting too high. Here are some tips for that. If you can't remember if you smoked weed or not, you smoked weed. If you can't tell if you're high enough, you're high enough. If you're smoking a bong any bigger than an old-fashioned Coke bottle, you're using a sledgehammer when a rubber mallet will do. Do you really need to smoke out of that 3-foot bong, or could something smaller, cleaner, and healthier suffice? One final and excessively important rule about the 420 rule is that the rule is a prohibition, not a commandment. Thou shalt not smoke weed before your own personal 420 is a prohibition that should be obeyed. Thou shalt smoke weed at 420, however, is not a command and should never be obeyed. Don't smoke weed just because you think it's time to smoke weed. Short-term memory loss is an observable side effect of the marijuana high. Side effects are bad, right? Not necessarily. The side effect of the antihistamine diphenhydramine is drowsiness. Pharmaceutical companies have made billions by marketing the negative side effect of the drug, inability to stay awake, as a primary positive effect of the same drug, increased ability to fall asleep. A negative can be a positive if viewed through the proper lens. When neurologists speak of deficit, it's presumed to be a bad thing. However, the disruption of short-term memory facilitated by marijuana may be the key feature of how the drug works to redirect the focus of consciousness from future to present. I've often had the experience of being worried about something. Then, after smoking marijuana, I soon realized that I had forgotten what I was worried about. It's not that I completely forgot about it. The concern was still there in my long-term memory, where it belonged, but in terms of my short-term memory, which is basically the gas tank for my working memory or consciousness, both the concern and the anxiety associated with the concern were gone. When short-term memory is delayed, so that thoughts in working memory fade more quickly, it makes room in our consciousness for new thoughts to come in. At the same time, it helps us escape the vicious cycle of ruminative thoughts that we perseverate upon, even though that perseveration does nothing to solve the problem. It's just overkill, our mind spinning in circles, hovering perpetually over a perceived problem that doesn't necessarily exist in reality, and therefore doesn't actually have a real solution. The marijuana high and its forgetfulness effect releases us from the repetitive loop of perseverative rumination. The absent-minded marijuana user does, quite literally, forget their troubles, at least for a while, and that's okay. The absent-mindedness of the marijuana high must not be conflated with mindlessness. It's no coincidence that the cultural acceptance and usage of marijuana over the past half-century has increased in perfect tandem with the advances in digital media technology that drive the information age. Marijuana is the drug of choice in the information age because it helps our brain deal with the daily problem of information overload and hyperconscious rumination. In an age of information overload, we crave mindlessness as an escape, but it's the opposite of mindlessness, mindfulness, that will enable us to recognize the pattern of experience that will relieve our overburdened and overloaded minds. Though mindfulness and media balancing, we can get our minds and our brains in sync, working together on the same page. That's when you'll see the true long-term benefits of marijuana mindfulness. We as a species have voted to legalize marijuana across the country and increasingly across the world because we as a species, struggling to survive within the maelstrom of total information overload, recognize its utility as an aid to mindfully reducing symptoms of the anxious depression evoked by our toxic media environments. Mindful marijuana users, ironically, don't smoke as much weed as other users because the cognitive effects of the drug are fostered and sustained by the user's purposeful and reflective experience of the so-called marijuana mind flip.